I stood in my kitchen staring at the legal documents that had just arrived by certified mail. My hands trembled as I read the plaintiff names Robert Calhoun and Linda Calhoun versus Calhoun Calhoun. My own parents were suing me for buying my house. The papers claimed I had purchased property that rightfully belonged to my sister Madison. 3 months ago, when I announced my home purchase after years of saving every penny, they seemed proud. Now, they wanted to take away my dream. I grabbed my phone to call Madison, expecting her support, but her first words made my blood run cold. "Madison, what the hell is going on?" I demanded as soon as she picked up. The silence stretched uncomfortably before she responded in a voice I barely recognized. "Calhoun, I'm sorry you had to find out this way." Her tone was cold, calculated. "But that house should be mine. Mom and Dad promised it to me years ago when I was going through my divorce." My mind reeled. "Promised you what house? I bought this place fair and square with my own money. I've been saving for 8 years. The family house Calhoun. The one that belonged to Grandma Dorothy before she died." I sank into my kitchen chair, the legal papers scattered across my oak table. "What are you talking about? I bought this from the Henderson family, some elderly couple who wanted to downsize to a retirement community." "You really don't know, do you?" Madison's laugh held no warmth. "That house has been in our family for 60 years. Grandma Dorothy lived there until she passed away 3 years ago. The Hendersons only owned it for 18 months. The room started spinning. I had fallen in love with this place the moment Jessica, my real estate agent, showed it to me. The 1950s ranch style with original hardwood floors, the large backyard with mature oak trees, the way morning light streamed through the living room windows. Never once did anyone mention it had family connections. "Madison, even if that's true, I bought it legally. I have a mortgage, a deed, everything proper." "That's where you're wrong, brother." Her voice turned sharp. "Mom and Dad have been researching Grandma's will. There were some irregularities when her estate was settled. Her lawyer misinterpreted her final wishes." I hung up and immediately called Jessica. She answered on the second ring, but her usually cheerful demeanor seemed strained. "Calhoun, I was wondering when you'd call. I've been getting some strange inquiries about your property purchase." "What kind of inquiries?" "People asking about the previous owners, the sale timeline, whether there were any family disputes. Someone even wanted to know if the Hendersons sold below market value." My stomach dropped. "Did they—" Jessica hesitated. "Well, now that you mention it, they did sell for about $15,000 less than I initially recommended. They seemed eager to close quickly. Mrs. Henderson mentioned something about wanting to avoid complications, but I assumed she meant the typical inspection issues." That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house in the suburbs where I'd grown up. The modest 2-story colonial looked smaller than I remembered. Dad was trimming hedges when I pulled into their driveway, and he looked up with an expression I couldn't read. "Son, we need to talk." Inside, Mom sat at their kitchen table with manila folders spread everywhere. She looked older than her 68 years, stress lines etched deeper around her eyes. "Calhoun, sit down." Dad's voice carried the authority of his retired teaching career. "What we're about to tell you isn't easy. Just tell me the truth." Mom opened the first folder. "Your grandmother Dorothy was very specific about her final wishes regarding the house. She wanted it to stay in the family. Then why was it sold to strangers?" "Because her lawyer, Gregory Walsh, made some questionable decisions about interpreting her will." Dad pulled out photocopied documents. "The official will left the house to a veterans charity, but we found evidence of a handwritten will that supersedes it." I examined the papers. The handwritten document looked authentic, with Grandma Dorothy's shaky signature at the bottom. It clearly stated that the house should go to Madison Calhoun, my sister. "Why didn't this come up during the estate settlement 3 years ago?" "Walsh hid it." Mom's voice turned bitter. "We think he had some arrangement with the charity to ensure they got valuable property donations. He died 2 years ago under suspicious circumstances." "Suspicious how?" "Car accident on a clear day, straight road, no other vehicles involved. Very convenient timing." I studied my parents' faces, searching for deception. These were people who had taught me honesty above all else. Dad spent 40 years teaching high school history. Mom taught elementary school for 35 years. They were respected in their community, known for fairness and integrity. Even if all this is true, I said slowly, I bought the house in good faith. I can't just give it up. We're not asking you to give it up. Mom reached across the table and touched my hand. We're asking you to do the right thing and transfer ownership to Madison. She's struggled so much since her divorce. What about my mortgage, my down payment, the $20,000 I've already spent on renovations? Dad and Mom exchanged glances. Madison would take over the mortgage payments and reimburse you for improvements. With what money she's been unemployed for 6 months. We'll help her financially, Dad said firmly. Family takes care of family. I left their house more confused than ever. That evening, I climbed into my attic to store some boxes and found something that changed everything. Behind the insulation, previous owners had left behind several items, including a photo album. I opened it, and my blood went cold. Every picture showed this house, but from decades past. There was a young woman in 1960s clothing standing by my front door. A family Christmas photo taken in what was now my living room. And written on the back of several photos in faded ink, Dorothy's House Christmas 1967. This was definitely Grandma Dorothy's house. But something else bothered me. I flipped through more photos and found one that made me grab my phone immediately. The photo showed my parents much younger standing on this same front porch with Grandma Dorothy. Dad had his arm around her shoulders, and Mom was holding baby Madison. The date on the back read at 1995. I called Jessica again. I need to know exactly when you first listed this property and who contacted you about showing it. Let me check my records. She paused. That's odd. The first inquiry came 2 weeks before the Hendersons even contacted me about selling. Someone called asking about properties in that specific neighborhood, specifically mentioning your address. Who called them? The caller wouldn't give a name, said they were asking for a friend who might be interested if it ever came on the market. The pieces were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they created. My parents had known I was buying Grandma Dorothy's house. They'd known all along and said nothing. But why would they set me up to purchase it only to take it away? Unless that was the plan from the beginning. I thought about the timing. I'd been house hunting for 6 months when Jessica called me about this property. She said the sellers were motivated and needed a quick close. I'd offered full asking price within 24 hours, desperate to finally own my own home. My parents had been following my house hunting journey closely, asking about every property I'd considered. When I told them about this one, they encouraged me to move fast. Don't let a good house slip away, Dad had said. Now I understood why. They wanted me to buy it, improve it, establish legal ownership, and then hand it over to Madison through a lawsuit that would make me look like the bad guy if I refused. I was being manipulated by the people I trusted most in the world. The next morning, I drove straight to my parents' house, legal papers in hand and questions burning in my chest. I found them in their kitchen drinking coffee like nothing had changed. We need to talk. Now. I slammed the lawsuit documents on their table. You both knew I was buying Grandma Dorothy's house, didn't you? Mom's coffee cup rattled against the saucer. Dad's jaw tightened, but he maintained eye contact. Son, we didn't know for certain until after you'd already made the offer. That's a lie. I pulled out my phone and showed them the photo I'd found. This picture proves you've been to this house multiple times over the years. You knew exactly which property I was buying. Dad studied the photo, his expression unreadable. Your grandmother invited us over occasionally after Grandpa died. That doesn't mean we remembered the exact address when you mentioned your house hunt. Stop lying to me. My voice cracked with emotion. I found Jessica's records. Someone called asking about my address 2 weeks before the Hendersons decided to sell. You've been orchestrating this entire situation. Mom stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Calhoun, you're being paranoid. Let me see this mysterious handwritten will. Mom retrieved a folder and pulled out several pages. The handwritten will looked authentic, but something felt wrong. Grandma Dorothy's signature appeared shaky, as if written under duress or during illness. When was this supposedly written? 6 weeks before she died, Dad answered. She was getting weaker but still mentally sharp. I examined the document carefully. This says Madison gets the house because of her financial struggles following her divorce. But Madison didn't get divorced until after Grandma died. My parents exchanged nervous glances. Mom sat back down heavily. The timeline might be slightly off, she admitted. Dorothy was concerned about Madison's marriage problems, which led to the divorce. You're still lying. I stood up and paced around their kitchen. I'm going to find Gregory Walsh's legal assistant. Someone must have records of what really happened. Walsh's assistant won't talk to you, Dad said quickly. Attorney-client privilege. Privilege ends when the attorney dies. That afternoon, I contacted Walsh's former law firm and discovered his assistant, Sharon Matthews, had started her own practice. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. Sharon was a woman in her mid-40s with graying hair and intelligent eyes. She seemed nervous when I introduced myself and explained my situation. I remember your grandmother, she said carefully. Dorothy was one of Mr. Walsh's longtime clients. What can you tell me about her will? Sharon glanced around the coffee shop, then leaned forward. What I'm about to tell you could get me in trouble, but I've been losing sleep over this situation. My heart raced. What do you mean? Your grandmother did have concerns about her family in her final months. She came to our office several times, very upset about pressure she was receiving to change her will. What kind of pressure? Family members were visiting frequently, bringing financial documents talking about who deserved what after she died. She felt manipulated and started questioning people's motives. Sharon pulled out a small digital recorder. Mr. Walsh was old school about keeping detailed records. He recorded many client meetings for accurate documentation. She pressed play and I heard Grandma Dorothy's voice, weaker than I remembered, but clearly distressed. Gregory, I'm worried about my family. Robert and Linda keep bringing Madison over here talking about how much she needs help. But I think they're using her divorce situation to manipulate my emotions. Walsh's voice responded, Dorothy, you can change your will anytime, but make sure any changes reflect your true wishes, not pressure from others. That's the problem. I don't know what I truly want anymore. Robert isn't even my biological son, but I've loved him like one for 70 years. Now I wonder if he's only being kind because he expects inheritance. The recording stopped. My world tilted off its axis. Mr. Walsh died before he could properly investigate Dorothy's concerns, Sharon continued. But he did take some precautions. He made copies of everything and asked me to safeguard certain information. What information? DNA tests your grandmother requested, adoption records she'd found, and evidence of financial pressure from family members. I could barely breathe. My father is adopted. According to the records, yes. Dorothy's family took in Robert as an infant in 1952. His biological parents died in a car accident. Sharon handed me a manila envelope. Dorothy specifically requested that if anyone challenged her will, or if family disputes arose, these documents should be made available. Inside the envelope, I found adoption papers, DNA test results showing Robert wasn't Dorothy's biological child, and financial records showing my parents had borrowed heavily against their own house. They're facing foreclosure, Sharon explained. Your parents owe over $200,000 in various debts. That's probably why they're pressuring for the inheritance. I drove home in a daze, my entire family history rewritten in one afternoon. My father wasn't my grandmother's biological son, which meant his claims to her estate were built on decades of accepted lies. My parents were financially desperate, facing the loss of their own home. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. That evening, I called Madison and asked her to meet me for dinner. We sat across from each other at a quiet restaurant, the sister I'd grown up loving, now feeling like a stranger. Madison, I need to ask you something, and I need the truth. She looked uncomfortable. What? Do you know Dad is adopted? Her face went pale. How did you find out? So you knew? I found out during my divorce proceedings when I needed birth certificates for legal paperwork. Mom made me promise never to tell anyone. There's more, isn't there? Madison stared at her untouched food. Calhoun, there are things about our family that you don't understand. Then help me understand. She took a shaky breath. Dad isn't just adopted. He's not your biological father either. The restaurant noise faded to silence around me. What are you talking about? Mom had an affair when she was married to Dad. You're the result of that affair. I'm Dad's biological daughter, but you're not. The floor seemed to drop away beneath me. That's impossible. Mom told me during my divorce when I was falling apart. She said she was trying to help me understand that families can survive anything, even terrible secrets. I gripped the edge of the table. So Dad raised me knowing I wasn't his son. He loves you like a son, but technically we're half siblings and neither of us is related to Grandma Dorothy by blood. Now I understood why Dorothy had been so concerned about family manipulation. She'd discovered that the people claiming her estate weren't even her biological relatives. She'd been supporting a family built on lies for decades. Does Dad know about me? Madison nodded slowly. He's always known, but he chose to be your father anyway. I felt sick. My entire identity was crumbling. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because what would it be the point you had a good childhood? Dad treated you exactly like his own son. Except now they're trying to steal my house based on false family claims. Madison looked confused. What do you mean? I explained what I'd learned about the adoption, the financial pressure on Dorothy, and my parents' debt situation. Madison's face crumpled. Calhoun, they told me Grandma specifically wanted me to have the house because I needed a fresh start after my divorce. Did you ever see this handwritten will? Mom showed me a copy, but she said the original was with their lawyer. I realized Madison was as much a victim of manipulation as I was. Our parents had used her emotional vulnerability during her divorce to convince her she deserved something that was never legally hers. Madison, what if our parents have been lying to both of us? She stared across the restaurant, tears forming in her eyes. Then I've just destroyed my relationship with my brother for nothing. The next morning, I decided to search through every corner of my house for more evidence about Grandma Dorothy's true intentions. In the basement behind an old furnace, I discovered a metal lockbox that previous owners had apparently overlooked. Inside were medical records, personal letters, and a folder labeled Family Truth. My hands shook as I opened Dorothy's medical files from her final year of life. The records painted a picture of a woman in physical decline but mental clarity. Dr. Amanda Foster had been her primary physician, and detailed notes documented Dorothy's concerns about family pressure and inheritance issues. One entry from 6 months before Dorothy's death caught my attention. Patient reports increased anxiety about family visits, suspects' ulterior motives regarding estate planning, requesting consultation for independent legal advice. Another entry from 3 months before her death was even more revealing. Patient requesting paternity testing for family members. States, we need to run some tests right away. What I'm seeing shouldn't be there. Concerned about inheritance claims from non-biological relatives. I immediately called Dr. Foster's office. After explaining my situation, she agreed to meet me during her lunch break at a medical building across town. Dr. Foster was a woman in her mid-50s with kind eyes and a direct manner. She looked tired, as if she'd been carrying a burden for years. I wondered if someone would eventually contact me about Dorothy, she said as we sat in her private office. She was troubled in her final months, and I felt terrible that I couldn't do more to help her. What can you tell me about the paternity testing? Dr. Foster pulled out a thick file. Dorothy suspected her adopted son, Robert, wasn't being honest about family relationships. She'd found some old letters and documents that made her question things she'd accepted for decades. What did the testing reveal? Robert wasn't her biological son, which she already suspected from the adoption. But the testing also revealed something unexpected about other family members. Dr. Foster handed me laboratory results. Dorothy tested DNA samples from items in her house, hair from brushes, drinking glasses after family visits. She discovered that Robert had biological children, but also that there were other children being claimed as family who weren't biologically connected. I studied the results, trying to understand the scientific terminology. In simple terms, Abaha, Dr. Foster explained, she discovered that one of Robert's claimed children wasn't actually his biological child. She became convinced that family members were being manipulated with false paternity information. My stomach dropped. Which child? The testing showed that a male child approximately 30 years old based on the DNA characteristics wasn't Robert's biological son. That was me. Dorothy had discovered I wasn't Dad's biological child, confirming what Madison had told me the night before. There's more Takaj, Dr. Foster continued. Dorothy also discovered that her brother Thomas, who died in Vietnam, had actually fathered a child before his death. A child that was given up for adoption, and whose existence had been hidden from her for decades. What happened to that child? Dorothy spent her final months trying to locate her brother's biological descendant. She felt that person had more legitimate claim to her estate than the adoptive family who had raised Robert. Dr. Foster handed me another folder. She asked me to safeguard this information in case family disputes arose after her death. Inside were letters Dorothy had written, but never sent, documenting her growing awareness of family deception. One letter was addressed to me specifically. "My dear Calhoun," it read, "if you are reading this, it means the truth about our family has finally emerged. I want you to know that I discovered you are not Robert's biological son, but I also discovered something else that might bring you comfort. Your biological father was a good man who died serving our country. Robert chose to raise you as his own, and for that he deserves credit. But you should not feel obligated to carry the burden of false family claims on my estate. I want you to be free to build your own life without the complications of inheritance disputes based on deception." Tears blurred my vision as I read further. "I have left my house to charity specifically to prevent family conflict. If it is ever sold, I hope it finds its way to someone who will love it for what it is, not for what it represents in family power struggles." Dr. Foster watched me process this information. Dorothy was a remarkable woman who wanted to protect her family from destroying itself over money and property. Did she know my parents were facing financial troubles? She suspected. Robert and Linda had been asking her for loans and discussing inheritance frequently in her final year. She felt pressured and wanted to remove that pressure by making her intentions clear. I drove home with my mind reeling. Dorothy had known everything. The adoption, my true parentage, my parents' financial desperation. She'd tried to protect all of us by removing inheritance temptations, but her plan had backfired when her house ended up being sold to me unknowingly. That afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call from someone who identified himself as William Harrison, Dorothy's nephew from her brother's side of the family. "I've been following the legal situation with your parents," William explained. "My grandfather was Thomas Dorothy's brother, who died in Vietnam. I think there are some things you need to know about your family's legal claims." We met that evening at a diner outside town. William was a successful-looking man in his late 50s who bore a striking resemblance to photos I'd seen of Dorothy in her younger years. "My grandfather Thomas did father a child before leaving for Vietnam," William began. "A son who was put up for adoption because the mother couldn't raise him alone." "What happened to that child?" "He grew up, had a successful life, and eventually had children of his own. One of those children was given up for adoption in the early 1990s. William handed me adoption paperwork and DNA test results. That child was Madison." My world tilted again. "Madison is related to Dorothy by blood. She's Thomas's great-granddaughter, Dorothy's great-niece by blood relation. Your parents have been claiming that Madison deserves inheritance as Robert's daughter, but they don't know she actually has legitimate blood ties to Dorothy's family." "Does Madison know?" "I doubt it. The adoption records were sealed, and the biological family connections were lost through multiple generations of separations." I stared at the documentation. Madison, who I'd thought was my full sister, was actually my adoptive half-sister with real biological ties to Dorothy's estate. Meanwhile, I had no blood relation to any of them, but had been raised as family. "There's something else," William continued. "Dorothy contacted me about 6 months before she died. She'd been researching family genealogy and discovered the connection to Madison. She wanted to ensure Madison would eventually learn about her heritage, but she was concerned about timing and family manipulation." "What did she decide?" "She decided to leave her estate to charity to avoid immediate family conflicts, but she set up a provision that if Madison ever learned about her biological heritage and wanted to claim her family connection, there was a legal mechanism for that." William pulled out legal documents I'd never seen before. Dorothy created a secondary will provision that would activate only if Madison's biological heritage was discovered, and she chose to claim it without coercion from Robert and Linda. Why didn't this come up during the estate settlement, Because Gregory Walsh died before he could implement Dorothy's full plan. He was supposed to investigate Madison's heritage and present her with options after Dorothy's death. I felt like I was drowning in revelations. So Madison actually does have a legitimate claim to Dorothy's estate, If she chooses to claim it based on her biological heritage, rather than false claims through Robert's adoption. But she would need to renounce the manipulative lawsuit and pursue her rights through honest legal channels. William handed me his business card. I'm a retired attorney. If Madison wants to explore her real family connections and legitimate inheritance rights, I'd be willing to help her do it properly. That night, I sat in Dorothy's former house, surrounded by evidence of decades of family deception, and realized that everything I'd believed about my identity and relationships was built on lies. But perhaps in the truth, there was a path forward that could heal rather than destroy what remained of our fractured family. Armed with the truth about our family's complex history, I knew I needed legal help that went far beyond simple property disputes. I contacted Marcus Thompson, an attorney who specialized in estate law and family fraud cases. Marcus's office reflected his military background, orderly, efficient, and no nonsense. After reviewing all the evidence I'd gathered, he leaned back in his chair with a grim expression. Calhoun, what you've uncovered isn't just a family dispute. Your parents have committed several serious crimes. What do you mean? Fraud, forgery, attempted theft by deception, and potentially elder abuse if they pressured Dorothy to change her will. Marcus spread the documents across his desk. That handwritten will your parents produced, I'd bet my license it's a forgery. How can we prove that? Handwriting analysis paper dating ink analysis. But more importantly, we have Dorothy's recordings expressing concerns about family pressure, plus medical records showing she was mentally competent and specifically worried about inheritance manipulation. Marcus picked up his phone. I'm calling a private investigator I work with. Janet Cruz is former police detective who specializes in family fraud cases. Within 2 hours, Janet Cruz was sitting in Marcus's office reviewing our evidence. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her late 30s who took detailed notes as I explained the situation. I've seen cases like this before, Janet said. Families in financial distress sometimes resort to elaborate schemes to claim assets they feel entitled to. The fact that your parents knew you were buying Dorothy's house, but said nothing, suggests premeditation. What's our next step? I'm going to investigate your parents' financial situation, their communications with Gregory Walsh before his death, and their interactions with the Henderson family who sold you the house. Janet's investigation moved quickly. Within a week, she'd uncovered information that shocked even Marcus. Your parents have been planning this scheme for over 2 years, Janet reported during our next meeting. I found evidence that they approached Gregory Walsh multiple times before his death, pressuring him to reinterpret Dorothy's will. She handed me bank records and phone logs. They also borrowed money against their house specifically to fund legal action, expecting to recover their investment through a successful lawsuit. What about the Henderson families? That's where it gets ugly. Your parents discovered the Hendersons were having financial difficulties and pressured them to sell quickly below market value. They used intimidation tactics, suggesting there might be legal problems with their ownership if they didn't sell fast. Marcus studied the evidence. They manipulated the Hendersons into a panic sale, then ensured you'd be the buyer, all while planning to take the property through litigation. Can we prove this? The Hendersons kept records of threatening phone calls and suspicious visitors. Janet continued. Mrs. Henderson documented everything because she was afraid of legal retaliation. That evening, I called Madison and asked her to meet me. We sat in my living room, Dorothy's former living room, surrounded by evidence that would change both our lives. Madison, I need to show you something that's going to be hard to accept. I explained everything I'd learned about our family's true history, showing her the adoption records, DNA tests, and evidence of our parents' manipulation. Madison listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just absorbing the magnitude of deception that had shaped our lives. So I'm not really your sister. You're my adoptive half-sister. Dad isn't my biological father, and you're not his biological daughter either. But we grew up together. You're still my brother in every way that matters. I handed her William Harrison's contact information and the documentation about her biological heritage. Madison, you actually do have legitimate ties to Dorothy's estate, but not through the lies Mom and Dad have been telling. You're Dorothy's great-niece by blood. She stared at the paperwork, tears streaming down her face. I don't understand why they lied to us about everything. Because they're desperate. They're facing foreclosure and thought they could manipulate both of us to solve their financial problems. What happens now? That depends on what you want to do. You can continue with their fraudulent lawsuit and probably face criminal charges along with them. Or you can help me expose the truth and pursue any legitimate claims you might have through honest legal channels. Madison was quiet for a long time, studying the evidence spread across my coffee table. Finally, she looked up with a determination I hadn't seen in years. I want to know the truth about my biological family, and I want Mom and Dad to face consequences for what they've done to us. The next morning, Madison called Marcus's office and asked to meet with him separately. She brought with her documents I hadn't seen before: loan papers threatening letters from creditors, and evidence that our parents had been borrowing money using her credit without her knowledge. "They've destroyed my credit," Madison told Marcus. "While I was dealing with my divorce, they were taking out loans in my name, promising they'd pay them back with inheritance money." Marcus reviewed her financial records. "This is identity theft and fraud. Madison, you're as much a victim here as Calhoun is. What can I do?" "First, we report the identity theft to police and credit agencies. Second, you can join Calhoun's defense against the lawsuit as a co-defendant who was also deceived." Janet's investigation continued to reveal the scope of our parents' deception. She discovered they'd been manipulating family members for years, borrowing money with promises of inheritance paybacks that were never legitimate. "Your Uncle William isn't the only relative who's been affected," Janet reported. "I found evidence that your parents have been collecting money from extended family members, claiming Dorothy left them as executors of various inheritance distributions." Marcus shook his head in disgust. "They've been running a long-term confidence scheme using Dorothy's memory and your family connections." "How much money are we talking about?" "Over $300,000 collected from various relatives over the past 3 years. That weekend, Madison and I decided to confront our parents together. We arrived at their house with Marcus and a court reporter to document their responses. Mom answered the door, and her face went pale when she saw our legal entourage. "What's going on?" she asked weakly. "We're here to discuss the fraudulent lawsuit you've filed and give you a chance to withdraw it voluntarily," Marcus announced. Dad appeared behind Mom, his face flushed with anger. "You can't bring lawyers into our home to intimidate us." "We're documenting your opportunity to avoid criminal prosecution," Marcus replied calmly. "Your son and daughter have discovered the extent of your deception, and they're prepared to file countercharges for fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse." Madison stepped forward. "Mom, Dad, I know you've been using my credit to take out loans. I know Calhoun isn't Dad's biological son. I know you've been lying about Grandma Dorothy's will, and I know you manipulated the Henderson family to ensure Calhoun would buy the house you planned to steal through a fraudulent lawsuit." Our parents' faces showed a mixture of shock, fear, and defiance. Mom started crying, but Dad's jaw set stubbornly. "You can't prove any of that." Marcus handed him a thick folder. "Actually, we can prove all of it. The question is whether you want to resolve this quietly or face public criminal prosecution." Dad opened the folder and quickly scanned the documents. Bank records, recorded phone calls, testimony from the Henderson family, handwriting analysis of the forged will, and evidence of identity theft. His shoulders sagged as the reality of their situation hit him. "We never meant for things to go this far." "What did you mean to happen?" I asked. Mom looked up through her tears. "We just wanted Madison to have a chance at a fresh start. We've been struggling financially, and we thought if she could get the house, she could sell it and pay off our debts while starting over." Using fraud and deception. "We convinced ourselves that Dorothy would have wanted family to benefit rather than some charity," Dad said quietly. Marcus consulted his notes. "You have 72 hours to withdraw the lawsuit and begin making arrangements to pay restitution to the family members you've defrauded. Otherwise, we'll file criminal charges and civil suits for damages." As we left our parents' house, Madison looked back with sadness rather than anger. "I feel sorry for them," she said. "They destroyed our family trying to save themselves, eh?" "They still have a chance to make things right," I replied. "But first, they need to face the truth about what they've done." Over the next few days, Sharon Matthews, Gregory Walsh's former assistant, proved to be our most valuable ally. She contacted Marcus with additional evidence she'd been safeguarding since Walsh's death. Mr. Walsh was very concerned about the pressure Dorothy was receiving from her family, Sharon explained during a meeting at Marcus's office. He made detailed video recordings of their final consultations because he suspected someone might challenge her mental capacity after her death. Sharon handed us several DVDs. These recordings show Dorothy's complete mental clarity and her specific concerns about family manipulation. We watched the recordings in Marcus's conference room. Dorothy appeared frail but sharp-minded, speaking directly into Walsh's camera. "Gregory, I want this recorded so there's no question about my intentions. I know Robert isn't my biological son, but I've loved him as such for 70 years. However, I'm deeply troubled by the financial pressure he and Linda have been applying regarding my estate." In another recording from 6 weeks before her death, Dorothy was more distressed. "They bring Madison here constantly talking about how much she needs help after her divorce. But I think they're using her emotional state to manipulate my sympathies. Madison is a sweet girl who deserves support, but not through inheritance manipulation." The most powerful recording was made just 3 weeks before Dorothy died. "I've decided to leave my house to charity specifically to remove the temptation for family conflict. I've seen too many families destroyed by inheritance disputes. If Robert and Linda are truly concerned about Madison's welfare, they can support her through their own resources, not by claiming assets that belong to charitable causes." Dorothy looked directly into the camera. "If anyone challenges this will after my death, I want them to know that every decision I've made has been deliberate and carefully considered. I will not allow my death to become the source of family destruction." Marcus paused the video. "This is exactly what we need." Dorothy explicitly states her mental capacity, her awareness of family pressure, and her deliberate intention to prevent inheritance conflicts. Sharon handed us more documents. "There's something else." Mr. Walsh discovered that Robert and Linda had been researching estate law and inheritance challenges for months before approaching Dorothy about changing her will. "What kind of research?" "Legal databases consultation with other attorneys about will contests and specific questions about challenging charitable bequests." Mr. Walsh documented everything because he was concerned about potential elder abuse. Janet Cruz had been conducting her own investigation and joined our meeting with additional evidence. "I interviewed the Henderson family in detail," Janet reported. "They provided documentation of threatening phone calls and intimidation tactics used to pressure them into selling below market value." She played audio recordings the Hendersons had made of suspicious phone calls. "Mr. Henderson, you need to understand that there could be legal complications with your ownership of that property. If certain family claims emerge, you could face expensive litigation." The voice was clearly Robert's, though he hadn't identified himself on the call. "They received 6 such calls over 2 weeks," Janet continued. "The message was always the same: sell quickly and quietly or face legal problems." Marcus reviewed the timeline. "Your parents orchestrated every aspect of this scheme. They researched inheritance law, pressured Dorothy to change her will, intimidated the Henderson family into a quick sale, monitored your house hunting to ensure you'd find their targeted property, and then filed a fraudulent lawsuit claiming family rights they knew were legally invalid." That afternoon, I received a call from William Harrison, Dorothy's nephew, who had legitimate family connections through her brother's bloodline. "Calhoun, I've been in touch with Dorothy's charity beneficiary. They're willing to waive their claims to the house if Madison wants to pursue her legitimate inheritance rights through proper legal channels." "What does that mean exactly?" "Madison could petition the court to recognize her as Dorothy's great-niece and legitimate heir, but she'd need to renounce any claims based on Robert's adoptive family status. She'd be claiming inheritance based on her biological heritage, not the fabricated family narrative your parents created." "Has anyone explained this option to Madison?" "I'd like to meet with her if she's willing. She deserves to understand her real family history and make informed decisions about her heritage." That evening, Madison, William, and I met at a restaurant to discuss her options. William brought extensive genealogical documentation, tracing Madison's lineage back to Dorothy's brother Thomas. "Your biological grandfather was Thomas Harrison's son," William explained to Madison. "Thomas died in Vietnam before knowing he had a child. That child, your grandfather, was adopted by a family named Patterson, who later gave you up for adoption when your biological parents couldn't care for you." Madison studied the family tree William had created. "So I'm connected to Dorothy through her brother, not through Dad's adoption into her family." Exactly. And Dorothy discovered this connection during her genealogy research in her final year. She wanted you to know about your heritage, but she was concerned that Robert and Linda would use the information to manipulate both you and her estate decisions. What would happen if I pursue this biological inheritance claim? Marcus answered. You'd need to withdraw from your parents' fraudulent lawsuit first. Then you'd petition the court as Dorothy's legitimate great-niece, presenting DNA evidence and genealogical documentation. The charity might transfer the house ownership to you, or you might receive equivalent value from other estate assets. But I'd be going against Mom and Dad completely. Madison, I said gently. They've already gone against us. They've used you as a pawn in their financial scheme and destroyed your credit with identity theft. This would be you claiming your real heritage honestly rather than participating in their fraud. William handed Madison more family photos and documents. This is your biological family history. You have aunts, uncles, and cousins who would welcome you. Dorothy specifically mentioned hoping you'd someday learn about your true heritage. Madison looked overwhelmed. I need time to process all of this. The next morning, Marcus received a phone call that changed the dynamic of our entire situation. The prosecutor's office wants to meet with us, Marcus announced. Someone has filed a complaint about elder abuse and inheritance fraud involving Dorothy's estate. Who filed the complaint? The charity that inherited Dorothy's estate. They've been investigating suspicious activity around her final will and discovered evidence of undue influence and fraud attempts. We met with Assistant District Attorney Patricia Reynolds that afternoon. She was a serious woman in her 50s who specialized in white-collar crime and elder abuse cases. Mr. Calhoun, your parents are facing potential criminal charges for elder abuse fraud, forgery, and identity theft, Reynolds explained. However, we're willing to consider reduced charges in exchange for full restitution and cooperation. What kind of cooperation? They would need to publicly withdraw their lawsuit, admit to the fraudulent claims, return money stolen from family members, and participate in counseling for financial and ethical rehabilitation. Marcus consulted his notes. What about Madison's legitimate inheritance claims? If Ms. Madison chooses to pursue her biological inheritance rights through proper channels, we would support that process. But she would need to completely separate herself from the fraudulent lawsuit first. That evening, Madison called me with her decision. Calhoun, I want to know my real family and pursue my heritage honestly. But I also want Mom and Dad to get help rather than just punishment. What are you thinking of? I'll withdraw from their lawsuit and pursue my biological inheritance rights. But I want to try to negotiate a plea agreement that gets them counseling and rehabilitation rather than just prison time. Are you sure? They're still our parents, even if they've made terrible decisions. Maybe if they get honest help, our family can eventually heal. I felt proud of Madison's maturity and compassion. Despite everything our parents had done to manipulate and deceive us, she was choosing a path that prioritized healing over revenge. I'll support whatever you decide, I told her. Thank you. For everything. For being the brother I needed even when we didn't understand our real family connections. As I hung up the phone, I realized that our family's crisis had actually brought Madison and me closer together than we'd ever been. We'd discovered truth, justice, and genuine love that wasn't based on manipulation or false promises. The court hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late October. Marcus had prepared meticulously, organizing evidence into clear categories that told the story of our parents' deception chronologically. Judge Patricia Reynolds presided over the family court session. She was known for her fairness, but also her intolerance for fraud and manipulation, especially involving elderly victims. Robert and Linda sat at the plaintiff's table with their attorney, David Mitchell, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as he reviewed the evidence Marcus had provided during discovery. Madison sat with us at the defendant's table, having officially withdrawn from the lawsuit the week before. This case involves claims that the defendant Calhoun purchased property that rightfully belongs to his sister, Madison, Judge Reynolds began. However, I understand there have been significant developments regarding the validity of these claims. Our parents' attorney stood up nervously. Your Honor, my clients would like to request a brief recess to discuss a possible settlement. Mr. Mitchell, you've had weeks to prepare. Are you ready to present your case or not? Mitchell glanced at Robert and Linda, who were whispering urgently to each other. We're ready to proceed, Your Honor. Marcus stood for our opening statement. Your Honor, the evidence will show that this lawsuit is built entirely on fraud, forgery, and financial desperation. The plaintiffs have manipulated family relationships, forged legal documents, and committed identity theft in an elaborate scheme to steal property they have no legitimate claim to. Marcus methodically presented our evidence. Sharon Matthews testified about Dorothy's video recordings expressing concern about family pressure. Dr. Foster provided medical testimony confirming Dorothy's mental clarity and deliberate estate planning decisions. Janet Cruz presented evidence of the intimidation campaign against the Henderson family, and William Harrison testified about Madison's legitimate biological heritage that the plaintiffs had hidden and misrepresented. When Marcus played Dorothy's video recordings, the courtroom fell silent. Dorothy's voice carried clearly as she explained her fears about family manipulation and her deliberate decision to leave assets to charity to prevent inheritance conflicts. I will not allow my death to become the source of family destruction, Dorothy's recorded voice stated firmly. Judge Reynolds watched intently as the video continued. If anyone challenges this will after my death, I want them to know that every decision I've made has been deliberate and carefully considered. Mitchell attempted to present the handwritten will as evidence, but Marcus immediately objected. Your Honor, handwriting analysis has confirmed this document is a forgery. The ink composition doesn't match any pens found in Dorothy's possession. The paper is from a batch manufactured after her death, and the signature shows characteristics of someone copying from an exemplar rather than natural handwriting. Judge Reynolds examined the analysis reports. Mr. Mitchell, do you have any response to these findings? Mitchell consulted with Robert and Linda, who were both pale and shaking. Your Honor, we request permission to withdraw this exhibit. The exhibit will remain as evidence of attempted fraud. Marcus continued presenting evidence of identity theft, financial manipulation of family members, and the systematic deception that had led to the fraudulent lawsuit. When it came time for the plaintiffs to present their case, Mitchell stood up with obvious reluctance. Your Honor, after reviewing the evidence presented by the defense, my clients wish to withdraw their lawsuit and make a statement to the court. Judge Reynolds frowned. Mr. Mitchell, are you withdrawing representation? No, Your Honor. My clients wish to address the court directly. Robert stood up slowly, his hands trembling. Your Honor, I need to tell the truth about what we've done. Linda grabbed his arm, trying to stop him, but he shook his head. We've been lying about everything. The handwritten will is a forgery that Linda created. We pressured my mother Dorothy to change her will, and when she refused, we decided to create false documents after her death. Judge Reynolds leaned forward. Mr. Robert, I must advise you that anything you say can be used against you in potential criminal proceedings. I understand, Your Honor, but my children deserve the truth and Dorothy's memory deserves justice. Robert's voice broke as he continued. We've been facing financial ruin for 2 years. We borrowed money we couldn't repay, used Madison's credit without permission, and manipulated her emotional state during her divorce to make her believe she deserved inheritance that was never legally hers. What about your knowledge of your son's house purchase? We knew he was buying Dorothy's house. We orchestrated the entire situation to get him to purchase it, improve it, and then transfer it to Madison through a lawsuit we knew was fraudulent. Linda stood up beside him, tears streaming down her face. We convinced ourselves we were helping our children, but we were really just trying to save ourselves from bankruptcy. Judge Reynolds studied both of them carefully. Are you admitting to fraud, forgery, identity theft, and elder abuse? Yes, Your Honor, Robert said quietly. We're guilty of all of those things. Mitchell looked shocked by his client's confession. Judge Reynolds called a recess to consult with the prosecutor's office about the unexpected guilty plea. During the recess, Madison approached our parents in the hallway. Mom, Dad, why did you confess? Linda hugged Madison desperately. Because we love you and Calhoun more than we love ourselves. We've made terrible mistakes, but we won't compound them by continuing to lie. Robert looked at me with tears in his eyes. Son, I know I'm not your biological father, but I've loved you as my own for 32 years. I'm sorry I let financial pressure make me forget what really matters. When court resumed, Judge Reynolds announced her ruling. The lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice due to fraudulent claims and forged evidence. The defendants are awarded attorney fees and court costs. I'm referring this matter to the prosecutor's office for criminal investigation of fraud, forgery, and identity theft. She looked directly at Robert and Linda. However, I'm also recommending that the prosecutor consider plea agreements that prioritize restitution and rehabilitation over incarceration given your voluntary confession and cooperation. Judge Reynolds turns to Madison. Ms. Madison, I understand you have legitimate inheritance claims to pursue through proper legal channels based on biological heritage. You're free to petition the probate court for recognition as Dorothy's great-niece and rightful heir. After the hearing, we gathered outside the courthouse. Marcus explained the next steps. Robert and Linda will likely face criminal charges, but their cooperation should result in plea agreements rather than lengthy prison sentences. Madison can now pursue her legitimate inheritance claims without any connection to the fraudulent lawsuit. Madison looked at our parents with a mixture of sadness and hope. I want them to get counseling and support, not just punishment. I put my arm around Madison's shoulders. They made terrible choices, but they're still our family. If they're willing to do the work to rebuild trust, maybe we can eventually heal. Robert approached me hesitantly. Calhoun, I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I want you to know that raising you has been the greatest honor of my life, regardless of biology. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of the love I'd always had for the man who'd been my father in every way that mattered, even though he'd lost his way in the darkness of financial desperation. Dad, we all need time to heal, but I believe families can survive anything if they're built on truth instead of lies. As we walked away from the courthouse, I realized that justice had been served not through punishment, but through truth finally emerging from decades of deception. Our family would never be the same, but perhaps it could become something stronger and more honest than it had ever been before. 6 months after the courtroom confession, I stood in my kitchen, Dorothy's kitchen, preparing dinner for a family gathering that would have been impossible to imagine during the darkest days of our legal battle. The criminal proceedings had concluded with plea agreements that emphasized restitution and rehabilitation over punishment. Robert and Linda each served 60 days in county jail, followed by 2 years of supervised probation, including mandatory counseling for financial responsibility and family relationship management. They had sold their house to pay restitution to family members they'd defrauded and were renting a small apartment while rebuilding their lives from scratch. The financial pressure that had driven them to desperation was gone, replaced by the hard work of earning back trust and living within honest means. Madison had successfully petitioned the probate court to be recognized as Dorothy's great-niece and legitimate heir. The charity that inherited Dorothy's estate agreed to transfer the house to Madison in exchange for a donation to their Veterans Assistance programs, a solution that honored both Dorothy's charitable intentions and Madison's rightful heritage. But Madison had surprised everyone with her decision. Calhoun knew, she had said 2 weeks after gaining legal ownership. This house belongs to you. You bought it. You've improved it. You've made it your home. I want to sell it to you for the exact amount you originally paid, and I'll use my inheritance money to start fresh somewhere new. Madison, you don't have to do that. Yes, I do. You've been the best brother anyone could ask for, even when we didn't understand our real family connections. This house should belong to someone who loves it for the right reasons. Now Madison owned a small house across town where she was rebuilding her life as an artist and exploring her connection to her biological family. William Harrison had introduced her to cousins and relatives who welcomed her with open arms, giving her a sense of heritage and belonging she'd never experienced. The dinner I was preparing would include Madison, William, and tentatively Robert and Linda. It would be our first family meal together, since the truth had emerged and everyone was nervous about how it would go. Dr. Rachel Morgan, the family therapist who'd been working with all of us individually and as a group, had suggested we start with small structured interactions to rebuild trust gradually. Healing from betrayal takes time, she'd explained during our last session. But families can emerge stronger when they choose truth over comfortable lies. Madison arrived first, bringing flowers and a cautious smile. How are you feeling about this? I asked as she helped me set the table. Scared, hopeful, grateful. She arranged the flowers in one of Dorothy's vases that I'd kept. I keep thinking about what Dorothy said in those videos about not wanting her death to destroy our family. She'd be proud of how we've handled everything. I think she'd be proud of how you've handled everything. You could have been bitter and vindictive, but you chose justice and healing instead. William Harrison arrived next carrying photo albums of Madison's biological family history. He'd become a bridge between Madison's past and present, helping her understand her heritage while respecting the family bonds she'd formed through adoption. "How are Robert and Linda doing in counseling you?" he asked as we waited for them to arrive. "Dr. Morgan says they're making real progress," I replied. "They're learning to recognize the thought patterns that led to their deceptive behavior and developing healthy coping mechanisms for financial stress." When Robert and Linda knocked on the door, the tension was immediate and palpable. They looked older than their years, carrying the weight of shame and remorse, but also a tentative hope for reconciliation. "Thank you for inviting us," Linda said quietly as she handed me a homemade dessert. "We know we don't deserve this chance." Robert stood awkwardly in the living room looking around at the house where his mother had lived and died, where his lies had nearly destroyed our family, and where truth had finally emerged. "It feels strange being here," he admitted. "I can almost feel Mother's presence, and I'm ashamed of what she would think of our actions." "Dorothy understood human weakness," William said gently. "Her recordings showed she was more concerned about preventing family destruction than punishing family mistakes." We sat down to dinner with careful politeness, everyone choosing words carefully, and navigating the emotional minefield of our shared history. "I want to say something to everyone," Robert began, his voice shaking slightly. "Linda and I have spent 6 months in counseling trying to understand how we convinced ourselves that fraud and manipulation then were acceptable ways to help our family." Linda nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "We learned that we'd been using crisis and desperation to justify increasingly unethical behavior for years. The house lawsuit wasn't the beginning of our deception. It was just the most extreme example." "What have you learned about yourselves?" Madison asked. "That we were so afraid of losing everything that we forgot what everything actually meant," Robert replied. "We were so focused on financial security that we were willing to sacrifice the love and trust of our children." Linda looked directly at Madison. "Honey, I'm especially sorry for using your divorce trauma to manipulate your emotions. You were vulnerable and hurting, and instead of supporting you honestly, we used your pain to further our scheme." Madison wiped her eyes with her napkin. "I forgive you, Mom, but I need you to understand that rebuilding trust will take time." "We understand, Robert said. "We're not asking for immediate forgiveness. We're asking for the chance to prove that we can become better people." I served dessert while everyone processed the emotional weight of our conversation. "I have something to say too," I announced. "This whole experience taught me that family isn't just about blood relationships or legal documents. It's about choosing to love and support each other through truth, not manipulation." I looked around the table at this complicated, damaged, healing group of people who were my family in various ways. "Madison, you're my sister by choice and love regardless of our complex biological connections. William, you've become family by welcoming us into Dorothy's true heritage. Mom and Dad, you're still my parents because you raised me with love, even though you lost your way when fear took over." Robert's shoulders shook with emotion. "Son, we don't deserve your grace." "Maybe not. But grace isn't about what we deserve. It's about what we choose to give each other when we decide that love is stronger than betrayal." Over the following months, our family continued to heal slowly and carefully. Robert and Linda completed their counseling programs and began volunteering with organizations that help families avoid financial crises. They learned to live modestly but honestly, finding peace in simplicity rather than desperation in financial striving. Madison flourished in her new life, developing relationships with her biological family while maintaining the bonds she'd always had with Robert, Linda, and me. She started selling her artwork successfully and eventually opened a small gallery that featured pieces inspired by family history and heritage. I kept Dorothy's house and filled it with new memories that honored both its past and its future. I started a scholarship fund for adopted children who wanted to pursue higher education, funded by rental income from the basement apartment where Madison had briefly lived. On the first anniversary of Dorothy's death since the truth had emerged, we gathered at her gravesite for a memorial service that felt honest and healing. "Grandma Dorothy, Madison said, placing flowers on the headstone. "We found our way back to truth. We found our way back to each other." William spoke about Dorothy's legacy of integrity and her desire to protect family relationships from the corrupting influence of greed. Robert and Linda apologized to Dorothy's memory and promised to honor her values going forward. I spoke last. Dorothy, you tried to protect us from destroying ourselves over money and property. Your plan didn't work exactly as intended, but your love for truth ultimately saved us. We're a different family now. Smaller, more careful, more honest. But we're also stronger because we chose healing over hatred. As we walked away from the cemetery, I reflected on the life lesson that had emerged from our family crisis. Truth always finds a way to surface no matter how elaborate the deceptions designed to hide it. Families built on manipulation and lies will eventually collapse under the weight of their own falsehoods. But families that choose truth, even painful truth, can rebuild themselves on stronger foundations. The most important lesson was about the difference between love and control. Robert and Linda had confused controlling outcomes with loving their children. Real love means supporting people's authentic choices and well-being, even when those choices don't benefit you personally. Madison and I learned that family bonds don't require blood relationships or legal documents. They require their honest communication, mutual respect, and shared commitment to each other's growth and happiness. Today, 3 years after the lawsuit that could have destroyed us, our family gatherings are quieter, more thoughtful, and infinitely more genuine than they were before the truth emerged. We've all learned to value trust over comfort, honesty over convenience, and authentic relationships over manipulative control. Sometimes the greatest gift a family crisis can offer is the opportunity to rebuild relationships on foundations of truth rather than convenient lies. Our family is living proof that it's never too late to choose integrity over deception and healing over revenge. Dorothy's house remains my home, but more importantly, it has become a symbol of how truth and love can triumph over even the most elaborate deceptions when people are willing to do the hard work of genuine forgiveness and authentic change. The real victory wasn't keeping my house. It was keeping my family together by insisting that our relationships be built on truth rather than manipulation. In the end, that made all the difference in the world. Have you ever faced a situation where family members you trusted betrayed you for financial reasons? How do you think you would handle discovering that your entire family history was built on lies and deceptions? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about how families can rebuild trust after betrayal. If this story touched your heart or made you think about the importance of truth in family relationships, please hit that like button and share it with others who might benefit from hearing about redemption and healing. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about overcoming family challenges and finding hope in difficult situations. Thank you for taking this emotional journey with me. May your own family relationships be built on foundations of truth, love, and mutual respect. Until next time, remember that it's never too late to choose honesty over deception and healing over revenge.